Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Eggs, the podcast. Today's special guest is Antonio Garrido. Antonio, welcome to the show. How are you?
Very good.
Let's talk a little bit about who you are and why we're talking today.
Well, who am I? Gosh, that's probably only interesting to me and my mum. But I'm a leadership development coach. I'm a leadership trainer and serial entrepreneur, and I'm going to say thoroughly good egg all round, right? But I help people figure out what their maximum potential is and how to get there, whether that's for an entrepreneur, solopreneur, anybody really. So that's why I'm here. That's what I do. And we do that all around the world with some clients from one individual all the way up to multi-billion-dollar organizations. So hopefully I'll be able to impart a little bit of wisdom for some of your audience and help them along the way and help them figure out how to get a little bit closer to their potential. How does that sound?
Sounds great. Sounds awesome.
How
can we talk
a
little bit about how you got into this?
So well, a million years ago when I first came out of university, because I'm fairly ancient, I was an architect. So that's how I started the world as an architect. I was I thought that when I was in uni, I would come out and I'd be designing cathedrals and museums and airports and all of that good, sexy stuff. And a couple of years designing Mrs. Miggins's kitchen extension wasn't quite as fulfilling as I had hoped it might be. My parents my whole family really had always been entrepreneurs. My dad, that's why we have the taxing surname, right? He's Spanish. And he always used to tell us it's better to be the head of a mouse than the tail of a lion, and you should start your own business whenever you get the opportunity to do so.
I like that quote.
It into me as a child. As normal children ignore their parents enormously, so I didn't do that. And I just got onto the corporate ladder. I, more by luck than judgment, found myself working for some genuinely world-class, tremendous leaders in bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger organizations. I went back to school because one of my companies encouraged me to do so, to do, like a MBA type thing, strategic business management. And I found myself running what you chaps would call, like 4 Fortune 60 companies with thousands of employees and billions in revenue. And then I decided about 15 years ago that I ought to listen to my dad after all. And started a business development company in Miami. You can tell from the accent, I'm not from Idaho, neither am I from Miami, but grew up in the UK. Me and my wife were going to be empty nesters. We went to Miami, set up a business, and genuinely didn't know anyone, right? Not with no little black book of business. I knew my brother who lived there because he was working for AstraZeneca at the time. And we, again, probably more through luck than judgment, we built that into one of the largest sales training companies in the world. And I wrote a couple of books on the back of that. Then I wrote this book here, this third book, which was all about leadership. And I knew that I had learned from the best. I had tremendous experience coaching leaders as well. So I wrote that book, kept it separate from the other brand, and this business has also gone stratospheric. So I've been really, really lucky. And here we are today. And I've just been really lucky in that. So that's who I am. So architect turned sales trainer turned leadership coach, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It seems like kind of an interesting trajectory. It's funny because I actually began life as an architect too. So nice. It's funny how far I've fallen, even though I still find I quite like architecture. But as we start to progress through these, sort of through our career, one of the things that has happened, and we've seen this on more than one occasion, is this move from sort of like a role of somebody who's creating art or doing architecture or doing, some sort of thing like this, where it's kind of more self-driven, I guess. And then they transition into sales, and then suddenly their voice is being amplified across all this, in these different directions. And so I wonder if, as you started to move through your career, Was there a specific time or a moment that made you switch where you just went, you know what, sharing my message is important and this is what I need to do? And I'm mostly asking selfishly because in my case, the, art and architecture and all that stuff was it was more about me and my ability to draft something or my ability to draw something. And then when we decided to start doing the podcast, it was really more about putting a voice out, right? But Mike has some sales training, so he's seen a lot of these kinds of things. But I'm very curious about just sort of that component
Yeah.
of human.
So I think, and it's interesting. I didn't know that you trained as an architect. I think a lot of people, a lot of leaders, not all of them. So there'll be a few listening that go, "That's not me," but most leaders do so as so. They want good things in the world and all of that kind of stuff. But actually, at the root of it, because it's the root of most things at any rate, is an ego piece, which is all about legacy, right? They want to build something that lasts. They want people to recognize the success that they've had, and they want to maybe even, leave the world or even the organization a better place than they left it. Interestingly enough, so do writers. That's why they write a book, and I've got 3 books now on contract for another 2. So I think that's also to do with legacy, because that lives after we go. I also think art and architecture is the same thing, because we leave a building, we leave something behind. So Freud has a lot to say about it. We won't go down that crikey rabbit hole of Freud and stuff. But as we get older, this is going to turn into a big philosophical debate, right? We'll have to break the whiskey out and the cigars in a minute. But as we get older, you know how older people, what they do is they tend to diminish today, and they say things like, it was better in my day, in the good old, bad old days, right? In the past, what they do is they emphasize the past, they upplay the past, forgetting that they didn't have running water and inside plumbing, right? They forget all of that, right? Radiators and stuff, right? They had none of those, creature comforts, but they talk in the past as the good old days, and this wouldn't have happened in my day, and isn't the world a terrible place? What they're actually doing, according to Freud, is they're diminishing. They can see their own mortality ever closer, right? Every day they get a bit closer to it. And the way that they handle that is by diminishing today. So it won't be so terrible if they're not around. Because in my day it was good, but now today's rubbish, right? And that whole thing is it's an ego play around, I'm not going to be around one day. So at our root, most of us, we do have this legacy. Some people argue that's why we have children, to carry on the Roghaar name or the Garrido name or whatever. Do you know what I mean? So I think architects really have, that's probably an ego play. That was me. Writing, probably an ego play. That's me too. Yeah, I'm always drawing things, I'm always I got that kind of stamped to my DNA, coaching people and training people and building things and passing them on. I think it's all something to do with legacy. And here you chaps here, you're putting a podcast together to, distribute to, countless people. I think that's a legacy piece too. So I think at its heart, a very long answer to a really short and intelligent question, Ryan, I think it's ego. I think it's ego.
That's an interesting outlook on it. And I've thought many times about this podcast being a legacy piece, because essentially we're trying to get the nuggets, the eggs of wisdom from all these people we're talking to, and not only trying to edify ourselves, but share that with other people, because it's important to me, and I'm sure it's important to Ryan as well, to kind of just grow as an individual, and in that growth share it along and help other people who want to tune in and listen. I remember in football in high school, my football coach used to always say "Carpe diem," seize the day.
Nice.
And thinking of getting old, I'm getting up there and thinking,
Don't think so.
I know it's like it's weird to think of that, but I have that same problem. I'll look back and like, man, 10 years ago when I was doing this or doing that, that was such a great time. But you forget that, if you don't live in the moment and you don't do everything you can to live up to your potential,
Yeah.
you're just wasting time. And you can have that same great um, experience as before. You just have to go out and live it and make sure that you're doing what you need to get there.
Yeah. One of these
So,
tremendous leaders I worked for, this was back before leadership was kind of very vogue and avant-garde, and everybody had to get leadership training before they could become a CEO. He would say to me, and I don't mean just once or twice, he would say to me and to everybody that he really worked hard on building a learning organization. And we've heard that 1,000 times. You've got the average CEO reads 60 books a year and all of that kind of stuff. But he would say to me and to everybody, he would ask us, what have you learned today? And he would say, because the only advantage you have today over yesterday is what you've learned. Because it's fairly grisly, this, but just go with it for a second. So what have you learned today? Because the only advantage we have today over yesterday is what we've learned. Because otherwise we're just a day closer to dead. That's what he would say, like all of the time. And he would ask people what they've learned. And if they hadn't learned, he was really, really disappointed. And he would also say, like, where have you failed this week? Because if you hadn't failed, right, then you hadn't learned, because you learn by failing. The absolute best way to learn how to not fall off a bike is to fall off a bike, right? When you fall off a bike, that teaches you pretty quick. You can watch YouTube videos about not falling off a bike, but the best way to learn how to not fall off a bike is to not fall off the bike. So, is to fall off a bike. So, where have you failed? And if you haven't failed, he would call that a week wasted too, because then there's nothing to be learned. Don't get me wrong. If you did the same thing over and over and over and over and over and failed all the time, you wouldn't be there for very long. But he was perfectly okay to fail because every time you fail, you win. If you learn something. If you don't learn something, then you don't. You just fail. But so long as you learn something and take it forward and bring it, it's like fail forward, fail fast, all of that kind of stuff. He was a big proponent of that. And I think that's great. I think that's great for everybody. I think it's great for children. I think it's great for ourselves. If you don't forgive yourself for failing and forgive others for failing, then you pretty quickly get a culture, whether in an organization, whether in a family, whether in a relationship, you get a culture of fear because people are scared to make mistakes for fear of your wrath or retribution. Terrible thing. So I think learning is the only advantage we have today over yesterday.
No, I really like that. And even though the philosophical step might have been I don't know, seemingly out of context for this conversation, what I actually quite like about it is, the landing on something like legacy, I think lends credence to why you're doing what you're doing. Yeah. Right. Because I think it makes it more impactful, because I think there are plenty of people that are, kind of the get rich quickers out there that are going, oh, okay, well, I can steal somebody's leadership program and get into business and see if I can make a quick buck or something. And, in any career, there's always going to be folks like that. But I think hearing your story specifically and just sort of lending to it this idea about legacy and understanding that, it could be ego driven, but it really is more about this legacy. I think that is a point that Mike and I have landed on in a number of different conversations. And I think it adds like sort of a layer of credibility to you as a guest. So I really appreciate you sharing that. So, but with that, then let's kind of take a left turn and start getting into some of this leadership stuff. Yeah. So I guess maybe first things first, where do you find that people struggle the most as you start to, engage with somebody who's interested in taking your program or working with you as a coach or an expert? Where are you finding that people have the most trouble, initially, or what brings them out of the woodwork to hire you?
Okay, so the biggest hurdle we always have to face is generally emotional intelligence and more specifically self-awareness. So let's just unpick that for a second. There was a piece of research done by the American Automobile Association or some other. They asked, I don't know, a few 100,000 people, like lots of people, do you consider yourself above average driver, because everybody thinks they're a good driver, right? I don't know anyone that kind of says I'm not a good driver, but everybody thinks they're better than average driver. And if you think about it logically, half should say I probably am, and half should say I'm probably not, right? And that's how averages work, right? If you're going to be an average driver, you're in the middle. If you're above average, so how can 80-90% of people claim to be a better than average driver, right? It's just the maths doesn't work. People have a rather skewed view of their own capabilities, and that's been demonstrated millions of times. Also, people have something called confirmation bias, and actually that confirmation bias is another mechanism to protect a bruised ego. I'll give you my favorite piece of research about that because it's just genius. Neither of you, I don't think, are old enough to remember. Do you remember a shop called Woolworths? No.
I know the name.
I know of it from like old 80s movies.
Okay, thanks.
That's
Old
the extent
ladies
of it.
movies. Thanks, I really appreciate it. Okay, so anyway, in the 60s, late 60s, I think it was Princeton, it may have been Harvard, they did a big research piece, and they went into Woolworths, and now I guess Walmart would be the Target perhaps would be the equivalent, so you all know what those are. And they bought hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pairs of white socks, right? And they split these socks into two. And they nailed one sock on one piece of the board and the other sock onto the other side of the board. So they got a piece of board, they painted it, remember, these are pairs of socks. They split into two, they nailed one on one side, nailed one on the other side. And on the left-hand sock, it said something like, washed in premium Tide liquid. And the one on the right-hand side, it said something like, washed in own brand powder detergent, right? Something like that, right? Got it? And they went out into the world. Remember, this is a pair of socks that they split. They went out into the world and they asked people, and they said, which sock is whiter? The one that was washed in premium Tide or the one that was washed in own brand budget powder?
Meanwhile, they haven't even been washed.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So, and the question was, which sock is whiter? So, let's be generous and try and assume what most people said. What do you reckon, Mike?
I would say they all went with the premium one just because of the word premium.
Right. It's a branded product and all of that kind of stuff versus, budget powder, right? So most people, and I can't remember the number, I'm going to say like 98, 98%, most people went the one that was washed in the branded product. And that's very understandable because of the associations that we have with, what good value stuff might look like. Okay, so that makes sense. Then they said, why? Why do you think the one on the left is whiter than the one on the right? And they came up with tremendously creative reasons for why the one on the left was whiter than the one on the right, including it's more of a bluey white, it's more translucent, it's a crisper, cleaner, right? All of that very poetic stuff. Then the instructor said, well, what would you say if I told you that we just bought these socks this morning from Woolworths and we separated them and we pinned them to the board? Okay. Now, Mike, what would you like to think that most people would now say when told?
You would think that you would like them to acknowledge the fact that they didn't know what they were talking about, but right. Most of them would probably double down or come up with an excuse of why their first, right. Because they didn't want to be wrong. They didn't want to. Right. And so to be honest with you, they probably made that choice in the first place, thinking that it was the right answer, not even having any comparison.
Right. So we would like to think they would go, oh, I'm such a fool. Oh, now you say, now you mentioned that. Yeah, I suppose they are the same, and aren't I a fool? Right. That's what we'd like them to say. But you're right, Mike. They double down. And here's what they also do. They start changing the laws of physics, right? They start blaming the researcher. You must have held it up wrong. When I looked at the one on the left, the sun was shining. When I looked at the one on the right, a cloud came over the sun. Right? You must have, like there was a shadow. Right? They start changing the world for a belief that they've had for maybe 5 seconds. Right? They've had this belief. They've not like had 30 years of this belief. They've had it for like 5 seconds. And they're arguing that it's the other guy's fault. So what they have here, what we have here, is this thing called confirmation bias, which kind of like we think we're right and everybody else is wrong, right? And we also have this low self-awareness, right? We have this ego and we have all of this stuff going on. So to answer your question, what's the biggest thing that we have to deal with when we first start talking to our clients is a pretty low self-awareness and raging blind spots. Now, I gave a talk not too long ago to about 400 leaders, all industries, all parts of the world, all over the place. And I said, by a show of hands, please, who here has no blind spots? Right? They were all leaders, so who here has no leadership blind spots? But the principle is the same. By a show of hands, who has no blind spots? Now, thankfully, nobody put their hand up. I think a couple were tempted, but they looked around the room and nobody else did, so they didn't. So nobody put their hands up. In other words, everybody recognized that they had blind spots. Terrific. Great, says I. Everybody recognized that they must have blind spots. Maybe they haven't considered it before, but they recognize that they probably had them. Great. Now I said, could everybody just take a moment and write down what your own particular blind spots are? And now we have a problem. Because they don't know what they are. If they knew what they were, they wouldn't be blind spots. So we all have blind spots, but nobody knows what they are. And no one's going to tell them. Because here's what never happens. I have led businesses for many, many, many years. Nobody has ever come to my office, knocked on the door and says, hey, Antonio, have you got 5 minutes? Sure. I say, come down, sit down. What's on your mind? No one has ever said, well, I've been watching your performance over the last 6 months or so. I just wanted to let you know that I think you're the worst leader I've ever worked for, dreadful in every single regard. I think this is awful, that's awful. It's never happened. I've never done it. I've said it about people, but to other people. I've thought it. I've never gone, right? Because it's hard to tell someone they got an ugly baby, right? That's hard to do, especially if you're the ugly baby that they're talking about. So we've got blind spots. We don't know what they are, and no one's going to tell us what they are, right? No one's going to tell us. Why? Because we're the guy that signs the checks and decides who gets the car park space near the front door, right? It's tricky. And if nobody's going to tell us this stuff, where does it come from? It just doesn't drop out of the sky, right? So to answer your question, what's the biggest thing that we have to deal with? Confirmation bias. People think they're better and smarter and more intelligent and creative than they actually are. They've got blind spots that they're not aware of. Self-awareness is low. Emotional intelligence is in the toilet. And that's some stuff that we have to deal with kind of before we get going, or at least get them to recognize that when their mother sat them on their knee when they were 3 or 4 years old and told them that they were the most intelligent, creative, handsome, gorgeous child in the history of the universe. Like the mum wasn't lying to them and she meant it, but maybe she was a little bit biased. And as Woody Allen said, the comedian, if you know who Woody Allen is, if it's not one thing, it's your mother, right? I think your mother's got, a lot to do with all of this. So, to answer, again, very good short question, very long, poor answer, but all of that stuff we have to get over so that they have enough professional humility to kind of, pay attention to some of the stuff that we're trying to.
So how do you, when you're coaching someone, what are some steps that you would take to help them address those blind spots and get over that?
Yeah, great question. Well, the first thing we do is we have them take like a benchmark, an assessment, like an objective as opposed to subjective assessment for all of these kind of leadership blind spots and these things that are holding them back. Those that have a reasonable amount of self-awareness, right, will look at the assessment and go, you're right, that's exactly me. And Yeah, I do that, and do have a tendency for that. And yes, now you mention it, I can do that every now and again, right? Those with really low, and we look forward to working with those guys. Those that have really low self awareness and go, I don't think so. They'll take all the good stuff and then all the bad stuff. They go, but this is just like, who can take these things seriously anyway, right? So they'll take the good stuff. The not so complimentary stuff they rail against, and we say, like, is there a significant other at home, maybe a wife, maybe a husband, maybe somebody like that? They go, yeah, how long have you been married? 26 years. Show her that. Call me tomorrow. And then they call back the next day. Okay, all right, I've spoken to my wife. Maybe there's something to it. So the first thing we do is, we're a little bit like the doctor. We wouldn't prescribe without first doing the CT and the MRI and the X-ray and take the blood test, right? So we have to do an assessment. And if somebody says to us, well, can you coach us in our team, but let's not bother with the assessment, right? Then we wouldn't do it, right? Because that's just malpractice, right? So the first thing we do, I think it was Mike that asked the question, is we'll do an assessment, figure out exactly what those things are that are holding them back. Next thing we do, Mike, and this is the unpopular. If you think that was unpopular, get this. So then we make them journal. If they don't journal, we won't coach them. Right. So 25 years ago, one of my bosses came to me and said, hey, and I'd just been kind of promoted to a position that really was it was political that I got the role. I wasn't ready for it by any means, but it was just expedient at the time to give it to me and not somebody else. But anyway, about 3 days into the job, there was a note on my desk to go and see him, and I thought, I've been rumbled. I'm going to get fired, right? I've realized that this I'm not the guy for the job after only 3 days. And went into his office and he said, hey, question for you, Antonio. Do you journal? Now, I didn't journal at the time, so I said no, and he asked me why. And the only thing I could think of at that particular point in time, because I'd never ever considered it, I said, well, probably because I'm not a 16-year-old Victorian schoolgirl, because I didn't know who else might do that sort of thing intentionally. So he said, well, okay, go and find the 8 most successful people you can in any walk of life and find out whether or not they journal. Now, my coach now, because I have a coach, because how can I not have a coach if I espouse the strength of having a coach, right? So my coach coaches presidents of countries as well as presidents of companies, right? And if they don't send him an image of their journal for that week, he won't coach them, right? It's like, because it's just a condition of the game, right? So when my boss back in those days asked me if I journal, and I said not. I then went to find 8 people, and every one of them did. Now, interestingly enough, any politician you can think of does. Any leader of any organization, anybody, all of those successful guys journal. And if you Google, there are other search engines available, the benefits of journaling, you're going to get billions with a B, not an M, billions of reasons why people should journal. And everyone that you can think of in sports, in business and entertainment, successful journal. And you got to say, coincidence? Well, you decide. But anyway, back to the point.
So
go ahead.
So when there's different forms of journaling, you can turn on a camera and you can talk to yourself. You can actually write it by hand. You can type it. You can read it into a microphone and have it, type out for you. Yep. Do you see any benefit of doing one versus the other, like handwriting it versus taking it, just talking to a camera or whatever? Is it mainly just getting your thoughts out, or is it the actual process of writing it down?
Well, in an ideal world, we want them to get out a pen, get a journal, right, and handwrite some stuff. So let me unpick that for a second. In an ideal world. So when we ask, then we now ask, if you were wanting to be a client of ours, we'll say, hey, Mike, do you journal? You'll say no. I don't know whether you do or you don't, but let's just pretend you say no. I'll say why. You'll say because you're not a 16-year-old Victorian schoolgirl. And then I'll say, okay, well, why don't you? And here's what we hear a lot of. We don't know what to write. We would do it. We know it's good. Everybody kind of talks about it, but we don't know what to write. Don't know when to write. Don't know how long, how much to write. Don't write. And they just put all of these barriers, very weak barriers of resistance to why they might not journal. We say, okay, cool. We'll tell you exactly what to write every day for the next 2 years, how much to write. And we give you a guided journaling path that follows, write 30 words on this, write 50 words on that, write 20 words on this, right? And we give people very,
What
very,
are
very
what are some of those things you have them write?
What's that? Sorry?
Like, if you have a guided path to getting someone into it, what are you having them write? Give me some examples of talk about your day, talk about your bit. Because when I think of journaling, I think of the 16-year-old Victorian girl. He liked me. He smiled at me. That's what.
Yeah. Well, so what do we have them write? Well, it starts off basic and it gets really advanced. So let's just go off a basic. And you don't have to have us do this. So here's what I'd like all of your listeners to do. If your listeners just do this, your audience just does this, let's talk about how long they have to do it for, specifically what to do, what improvements they might see and how quickly, right? We good with that?
Sure.
Real entry level you don't have to be clients of ours to do this. You go on our website, loads of free stuff, but you don't have to do any of that. Here's the first thing we say to them. So we'd say to a leader, let's just start with this. At the end of the day, before you go to bed, before you turn on your, subconscious creative brain, here's what I'd like you to do. Let's just start reflecting, because wisdom comes from evaluated experience, not from time served, right? So evaluated experience. Here's what I want you to do. Just for the next 2 weeks, Mike. 14 days, that's all. At the end of every day, just think back on that day and give yourself like a report card for the day. And all you have to say is, yeah, I was probably a B- today, right? And we start by saying, do you want to be a world-class leader? Do you want to be best in class? Do you want to be good? Do you want to be average? What kind of leader do you want to be? And invariably people go, yeah, no, the best. Okay, good. So compared to the best, what do you report for today? What would you give yourself? And people go, all right, well, I'll probably give myself a B+. And then that's how we start. Just give yourself a score for today. Then we'll say, okay, well, what would you have done or could you have done or should you have done or not done or said, right, to make that B+ an A-? What could you have done that was a little bit better? That's all I'm asking you to do for a couple of weeks. If it's an A-, what would you have needed to do to make it an A? If it was an A+, what would you have needed to do to make it an A++? You get the idea, right? Start to look back. Now, that hindsight, when you're looking back, you're reflecting, you're looking in the rear view mirror. How did I do today? That hindsight, where you go, A-, could have been an A+ if I had done this or not said that. That's it. Just 3 or 4 sentences. The end. How difficult is that? Write them in a book so you've got a record of them. Easy peasy lemon squeezy, right? For 2 weeks. Not for 2 years or 2 decades, for 2 weeks. Here's what happens. Before too long, probably about 10 days. Here's what happens, Mike. You're talking to somebody and you go, actually, future Antonio, like in 4 hours' time when I'm reviewing this conversation, you almost like third party it, like a fly on the wall. I just said this, but you know what? I'm going to be able to give myself a better score if I thank them and also suggest this, right? And what happens is that hindsight starts to develop insight, where you go situationally, where you go, I want to give myself an A in about 4 hours. So if I'm going to give myself an A, in 4 hours, I'm going to say this and not that, right? So in 2 weeks, you're already better. because you've started to evaluate yourself, and started to, with some hindsight, develop some situational insight. Here's what then happens. You do that for about 2 weeks, and then you start to develop foresight, right? Where you go, if I do this, I'm going to stop that bad thing from happening, right? I read a book just recently. It was called Turn the Ship Around. Brilliant book about a submarine captain who said, what's better, a little bit of rudder far away from the rocks or a lot of rudder real close to the rocks, right? So what happens is we start to, that hindsight, which leads to a situational insight, and then starts to lead to some foresight. You start predicting things, right? And you can start to give yourself good scores for those things. We have them do that for 2 or 3 weeks. Now they're in the groove, right? Every day, Mike, I'm guessing, I'll go to Ryan because I don't know about Mike. Ryan, every day you brush your teeth, right? Every single day, right? You brush your teeth every day. Every morning and every evening, you brush your teeth. What, even on your birthday? Yeah. Thanksgiving? Yeah. Christmas Day? Yeah. Rosh Hashanah? Yeah. Hanukkah? You brush your teeth every day. There probably hasn't been a day since you were 6 that you haven't brushed your teeth. Or if you have, it's incredibly rare. It's like rocking horse poo, right? There are no days when you don't brush your teeth. Well, if you can find 5 minutes in the morning or 3 minutes in the morning to brush your teeth, 3 minutes in the evening to brush your teeth, and you wash your hands before a meal, and you pick up your socks, and right? There are things you do. And when you're a leader, baked into that is a responsibility to develop yourself, because when you develop yourself, you develop your people. When you develop your people, you develop your business. You future-proof yourself, your people, and your business. It's the gig. It's like when you're a parent. Have either of you got kids?
Yeah, I do.
How old?
I have a 17-year-old and a 13-year-old.
Okay.
And it's funny listening to you describe all this stuff, because I think about the conversations I'm having with my kids every day, which are the, brush your teeth so that you don't get cavities down the road.
Right.
Clean up your room so that the
Right.
house is clean for this week. Or the big one that happens every week, we do our weekly house cleaning or whatever. And it's like, hey, put your phone down and hammer out the vacuuming. You'll be done in 20 minutes.
Right.
And instead they stare at their phone and it takes them all day.
Right.
It's like, do you guys hate cleaning or do you love cleaning? I can't tell,
Right.
because, and so, but we do a lot of this kind of thing, which is do a thing now for the future. And, it's funny. My son is working on becoming a long snapper for football, and he wants to go to college being a long snapper playing American football. And, so he's doing all these camps, and he's, working with trainers and doing all these things to improve his score, so that he's more eligible for scholarship and things like that, right? So he's really starting to get to an age at 17 where these things are starting to click for him, right? Where he's going, oh, okay, so the work I'm putting in this week, it's not going to make me better next month, but in 3 months, I'm going to be really good. And, and so he's starting to get some of that foresight. And it's interesting, as you're talking about it, because there's plenty of adults I know that should know this by now, and don't. And that goes for, leadership folks as well as, just your run-of-the-mill human beings.
Yeah, I think, when you're a parent, baked into the gig, because I have 4. Now, there were many days that the last thing I wanted to do was change diapers, many days. But you change diapers, it's the gig. When you're a parent, you change diapers. You feed them, not just when you feel like it, but every day, because you got to feed them, because that's baked into the gig. Baked into the leadership gig is you have to develop yourself and your people, and therefore your business. You have to. And if you're not interested in self-development, and you judge everyone by their actions, but you by your intentions, right? If that's the kind of leader you are, then we don't help those people. But it's the ones that go, I have a responsibility to future-proof me, because what got me here won't get me there, right? Because the world's changing so much. So that, Marshall Goldsmith, that genius, other leadership coach, I'm not saying I'm also a genius, but the other leadership coach, Marshall Goldsmith, who is a genius, right? That whole principle of what got me here won't get me there. We have to skate to where the puck's going to be, right? Because if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. And imagining something else, as Einstein said, is do the same thing over and over again and expect different results is madness. So we have, as leaders, as managers, as parents, we have a responsibility to be the very, very best that we can be, and help people as much as we possibly can. And journaling, which helps that self-awareness, because no one's going to do it for us. No one can do it for us. You can't brush your children's teeth. They can only do it for themselves, and no one can brush your teeth. Only you can do it for yourself, right? So that journaling, and coming back to Mike's original question, when you write it, and I don't care if you're going to record it, have some kind of AI transcribe it, just start. Just make an imperfect start and course correct on the way. When we tell people, yeah, we've got an app, right? We're all very, very modern. We're like a Bentley, right? Classical styling and classical themes, but we still got anti-lock brakes and GPS, right? But just start, make an imperfect start, course corrector on the way, and before you know it, they're all asking for leather-bound journals, fountain pens, and all of that kind of stuff. Now, I know instantly a lot of your people have turned off, and I'm not saying that's a condition, but journaling is a condition of employment because
and I think that journaling is indicative of something bigger, right? So, I mean, journaling is how it's manifesting, but really what we're talking about is raising awareness, being thoughtful and purposeful in the things that we're doing. I mean, there's more. I mean, like I say, journaling is the manifestation, but I mean, there's this global problem which we've got to do, which is if you hope to be a good leader, if you hope to be a good parent, if you hope to be a good friend, if you hope to be a good dog owner, you need to have some awareness of your situation, and you need to have some willingness to put in the work, and I think that journaling is one of those things that maybe doesn't come naturally to everybody, so it kind of imposes these thought processes on.
And take responsibility for what's happening to you.
I've never thought of journaling as that. I always thought of journaling as just putting your thoughts down on paper, but the actual thought process of putting it on paper and thinking of it with the thought of improvement of what I could do better the next day, and the self-awareness portion of it, that's the critical part. I've always kind of had those meditation moments where you're like, when I'm working, I usually will like either have earplugs in and just be quiet and thinking the whole time. And that's kind of been my form of that, but I've never actually written it down with that thought process in mind. It changes the whole game.
Yeah, it's like meditating on paper. It's just being intentional about kind of leader person that you want to become. And then you can easily become that thing. It feels like a much harder slog than it actually is. People tend to, when they, you'll be staggered at how many people we start to work with, and we say, do you have your core values written down? And they don't. We ask them what they are, and they don't know what they are. But then we do a simple 5-minute exercise, and again, it's on the website. They figure out what they are, and as soon as they know what they are, they can then be intentionally true to those things. We ask them what their goals are. If anybody here has people that work for them, that's listening, can hear my voice right now. If you've got people that work for you and you don't know what their top 3 personal goals are, you can't lead them, because until you can tie their personal goals to corporate goals, you can't motivate them. So if you can just do one thing tomorrow, spend a bit of time with your people and tell them what your bucket list looks like, and then have them. There was a lady that was a client of ours, and she was telling us how difficult she was. She was a lawyer, because she didn't want to solicit, and so she didn't want to make cold calls and things like that. And we told her, you got to do that, it's part of the gig, right? When you think about the most successful lawyers, compare them to you, because you've just got past the bar and you just hung your shingle, and right, it's just you. What more law do the most successful, largest law firms know that you don't know? What laws were they taught in Harvard that you didn't get in Miami-Dade College, right? For example, right? They don't know more law than you know. The reason they're successful lawyers is not because they were taught better laws or They were taught all the shortcuts, all the stuff that you don't know. Your student loan isn't big enough to know the real good stuff, right? They kept that for the ones that paid a lot more money than you did. That's not the case. The reason that they're more successful, have very large law practices, is because they're better at growing a business than you are. But you all know the same laws, right? Right? You all know the same reference materials. You all know the same stuff. But they figured out how to grow a business that just happens to deliver law, right? So we told her she had to make cold calls, and she didn't want to make cold calls. And then we asked her what one of her life goals was. And she said that she wanted, for whatever reason, to take her and her family to Disney in Japan. And then we figured out why that she wanted to do that. And it's a thing that she wanted to do. We had her open a bank account called Dialing for Japan, right? And then every time she made a call that turned into money, all of the money, all of the profit from that went directly into this account and nowhere else, right? She's been 3 times with her and her whole family to Japan based on. So what we did was we connected what it was that she, right, was about, and that's, so if there's anybody here listening that manages or leads people and you don't know their personal goals, then you can't meet them. So come back to what are your goals? What are your personal goals? What are your life goals? What are you trying to achieve? Right? Start writing stuff down. Where are you going to write this? Well, in your journal also. And there's a million things we ask you to consider to help you improve. Sorry, you were going to say something, Mike.
I have personal life experience with cold calling. Ryan mentioned earlier that I kind of have a background in sales. I haven't for a long time, but at one point I was a loan officer, and our entire income revenue was from cold calling. I would call. I had a list of people that I was given daily, and I would call them on the phone, and I would eventually get to the point where I would refinance their house through a cold call, and try and get that now from people where you're calling and trying to get personal information over the phone for a refinance purpose. It just doesn't happen. Everyone's been trained to ignore A, incoming calls, and B, giving any personal information out over the phone. So you can, even back then, this was in 2006, it was hard enough to even get people to start talking about a refinance, let alone give you their information to be able to do a refinance over the phone. And it's a numbers game, really. It's a matter of just continuing to do it and continuing to do it. I even at one point did door-to-door sales, and it teaches you a lot and how to A, talk to people, and B, build a rapport with them to where they're actually like you and will buy from you eventually. And I love that, opening a bank account to where that money in particular, any outbound effort that you make goes into that, because it solidifies it.
Yeah, good. I mean, it doesn't just have to be, that was just using that as an example, right? But
yeah, no.
Yeah. So listen, and there are those that will say, I don't want to make cold calls. Okay. If the reason is legitimate, terrific. Spend an hour a day on LinkedIn because all of your clients are in there, right? So do that instead. Networking event. There's a million things you do, email campaigns and all of that kind of stuff. So, but anyway, the point being that this doesn't just work for salespeople. The principle works for everybody, right? So, and your journaling is just a place to think. You'd be staggered what improvements can be made. And Ryan will understand this probably more than anybody else because he was an architect like me. I spend days drawing things, right? This is today's kind of model. I was modeling some stuff and explaining when you can, one of the things we talk about leadership is modeling things, making decisions with tools and models that help you understand it, help you then describe it to other people, help you then, grow your business. And one of the things that we'll have people do as a journaling practice on today is just sit with a piece of paper, and the prompt might be, what's broken, missing, or confused, right? And it just might be, okay, well, what's broken in the business? Well, could be this, could be this, could be, okay, what's missing? What are people confused about? We might say follow an order in your head around the business. What's broken, missing, confused? So we ask them to do a million different things. So we prompt it. So we take the heavy load out of it, and then all they have to do is then apply it. Here's what we then do. Here's what I think is maybe the most important thing, Mike and Ryan. A year later, we assess them again, because we tell them where they start, and then every year anniversary, we assess them again, because if we can't demonstrate, that they're making progress, then we shouldn't be doing what we're doing. So we constantly, we assess them, we show them their biggest issues. We'll arm wrestle about what they need to do about those things. We set them off on that journey, and it's unique to everybody. We have them be very focused on that, and all of our coaches know for each of the people exactly what they're working on, as well as the day-to-day stuff, right? So we work a lot on helping our leaders do two things. We got good leaders know how to light fires under people, and great leaders know how to light fires within people, right? And so sometimes we've got to light fires under people, including ourselves, and within people, including ourselves, and we figure all of that out. And then we go, okay, here's what you're going to do for the next 3 months, and here's what you're going to do for the next 3 months, right? And we get them doing all of that stuff. They invariably, if they make it past about 20 days, they never stop, right? And every year we measure them, give them 3 new things to think about, because it's better to get 3 things nailed than trying to approach 50 things and get them all screwed up. That's one of the problems with TikTok and YouTube and all of that.
Shortening attention spans. So one of the things I just kind of want to summarize some of the stuff. We're starting to get near the end here, but one of the things that I'm really hearing in what you're saying, and like we were talking earlier about journaling being sort of the manifestation of taking time and being intentional. But I think that maybe even if we get a little higher level, 25,000 foot view, what it is really about doing hard things and doing things that maybe don't come easy or don't come naturally, but that the work, will basically yield the benefit. And, listening to Mike's story about sales and your story about trying to coach your client through, making cold calls. The concept of making cold calls, it terrifies me. Like I would hate to do that. And so I can empathize with that person's case is that, I just want to be a lawyer. I don't want to make phone calls. Like this is not what I want to do. And so I can totally empathize with that. But through or by virtue, I guess, of doing something hard and uncomfortable and being pushed, having your boundaries pushed a little bit, she came out the other side stronger, at least, financially, but also she no doubt learned a lot about how to talk to people and how to be convincing. And I don't know, if you're an attorney, maybe that's a great skill, being able to persuade, might be a really good skill for a lawyer. So I can see how, even though really what it is, hey, look at the light over here, which is, or we've got the shiny thing over here, which is a cold call. And it seems totally irrelevant to what we're doing. What it's actually doing is building up all the skill sets over here for, whatever, bit of growth that we're trying to make. So I really like that. The other thing I wanted to just kind of touch on using sort of the metaphor you used of modeling as a tool. Right now I'm in a kind of an interesting situation. I'm working with a tech startup and I'm running their development team, software development team. Yeah. And I have years of experience working with web developers and things like that. So I understand some basic, framework and concepts around the idea of running a development team. However, software is a different beast than I've ever dealt with before. And so I've found that using modeling is really helping me articulate things to a team of developers who don't, who are basically working with a layman. I don't know how to tell them how to do what it is I want done, but I can show them a model of this is what I want the software to do. And then they can put kind of the secret sauce on it, right? So by being able to give it to them in a way that is fundamental, if my UI or my design or my concept is working, then they will have a software solution for it. And we're able to bridge that gap between my technical knowledge and their, knowledge of sort of front end or user experience. and, come together as a team, even though, as from a technical standpoint, I'm not the world's number one software leader. Right. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to affirm what you said there about using models.
2 points. First of all, to the first point, you're exactly right. And everybody knows there is no comfort in your growth zone and there's no growth in your comfort zone, right? So it's about doing the uncomfortable things that you have to do, like it's baked in. As far as your development team, sometimes we'll talk to a prospect and they'll say, well, what do you know about sticking the non-stick to the frying pan, as an example, right? And I know zero about sticking non-stick to frying pan, right? Or software development. I don't know anything about any of those kind of things. And that's your job to do that stuff and all of the engineers to do that stuff. What I do know is if you can figure out how to get your software or your team of software engineers to not just cooperate, but genuinely collaborate, then they're going to do better work, right? And faster and better and unpredictable and unexpected good stuff, right? If you can get them to collaborate. So we spend more time with our clients fixing those fundamentals of leadership as opposed to the thing that they do. The thing that they do, they're probably pretty good at. They're certainly better than we'll ever be. But in terms of teaching them how to coach their people, in terms of getting them to be collaborative, in terms of knowing how to, the difference between management and leadership and being more proactive and people focused and task focused and reactive, right? All of those kind of things, which we can model and demo to them. And when we model it and show them and they get it, they can then teach it to others, and then these things spread tremendously. So, yeah, you're exactly right.
Yeah. I guess on parting notes, we're kind of overtime now, but we're one last thing. Yep. In terms of journaling, if you can get to a point where you're doing it every day and you do it for that 2-year period or whatever you were talking about earlier, yep. I would say that that's a good approach for building good habits. Like, because if you can do it on a daily basis and journal consistently, that's something people don't like to do or want to do, but it's a good habit to get into, kind of like making your bed in the morning.
It's like the brushing the teeth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I said to the dentist, what, have I got to floss every day? Every day, floss? And he goes, no. And I said, well, like all my teeth? He said, no, just the ones you want to keep. Right? So, you brush your teeth every day. It's habitual. It's baked in, right? It's stamped on your DNA. And if you don't brush your teeth, you can't sleep, right? You get to the point where if you haven't journaled and emptied your mind, you can't sleep. And it's all part of your, this whole thing we've been talking about is the whole thing is about the mind, isn't it? Right? It's about leadership. Yeah. It's about the mind.
It really is.
I don't have time to journal. And they say, well, I don't have time to look after my wellness. And we say, well, if you can't find time to look after your wellness, you'll be forced to find time to look after your illness, right? It's the same stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. I actually like that quote a lot. That's good. Parting shots, Antonio. Where can people reach out? How can they get in touch with you?
So I'm very contactable. Antonio so it's Antonio at My Daily Leadership, all one word, mydailyleadership.com. Send me an email. We'll have a chat. Or go to our website. Loads of good stuff there. All the W's, mydailyleadership.com. Read the book. Go on Amazon. It's available in all the formats. This third book, I narrated that myself. So if you want to hear more from me, go download that. Or Kindle, electronic, paper's always good.
Love it.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, thank you so much, Antonio, for taking the time to talk with us today. I think this is really important stuff. And we spend a lot of time really on one or two big habits, but I think that those core changes, if implemented by people in our audience or even ourselves, I don't journal and probably could benefit from it. And so, yeah, I know. I do handwrite everything. Like I have notes for days. So, I kind of journal in that sense, but I'm not very purposeful about it. So I think there's some room for me to improve too. So I think that's great advice, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share.
You're very welcome. I hope you do. If you struggle, let me know. Thanks.
Absolutely. So, and thanks so much to everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. See you guys next time.
See you next time.